She entered through the service door every morning at 5:30, invisible as steam from the industrial coffee machine, until the day her 7-year-old daughter's fingers touched ivory keys and the mansion's marble floors trembled with genius. They had dismissed her as just another cleaner. They never expected to discover a musical prodigy hiding in plain sight. The dawn light filtered through the crystal chandeliers of Oliver Stanton's Manhattan estate, casting geometric shadows across hand-polished mahogany floors. Chelsea Brooks pushed her supply cart down the marble hallway, wheels squeaking against the silence that only old money could afford. Her uniform hung loose on her thin frame, navy blue polyester that smelled faintly of industrial detergent and yesterday's exhaustion. She had perfected the art of invisibility over 3 years of working in this house. Eyes down, movements efficient, presence minimal. The morning routine never varied. Dust the library, vacuum the sitting rooms, polish the grand piano in the music salon. The Steinway Grand was her favorite piece to clean. Its ebony surface reflected her face like a dark mirror, showing her the woman she'd become since Marcus died. At 32, Chelsea carried grief in the set of her shoulders and hope in the careful way she counted each paycheck. Every dollar went toward Dorothy's future. Her daughter was brilliant, reading at a 4th grade level at 7, asking questions that made Chelsea's chest swell with pride and panic. How do you nurture genius on a house cleaner's salary? Oliver Stanton swept past her in the foyer that Tuesday morning, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble. He was on the phone, voice sharp with the authority that comes from owning half of Manhattan's real estate. His eyes passed through Chelsea like she was part of the furniture. The acquisition needs to close by Friday, he barked into his phone. I don't care about their concerns. Results matter, not excuses. Chelsea had heard variations of this conversation dozens of times. Oliver Stanton was the kind of man who measured worth in quarterly reports and stock portfolios. She doubted he even knew her name. The incident began during the charity gala preparation that Thursday evening. Oliver had invited 50 of New York's elite to discuss his latest philanthropic venture, something about funding arts education in underprivileged schools. The irony wasn't lost on Chelsea as she arranged flowers in the ballroom while Dorothy waited in the kitchen, doing homework at the staff table. Make sure the good crystal is spotless, instructed Patricia Whitmore, Oliver's head of staff, her voice carrying the particular disdain reserved for people she considered beneath her notice. These guests expect perfection, not whatever passes for clean in your world. Chelsea's fingers tightened around the polishing cloth, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that dignity meant choosing your battles, and this wasn't worth losing her job over. The evening unfolded in predictable luxury. Men in $1,000 suits discussed tax write-offs over champagne that cost more than Chelsea's monthly rent. Women in designer gowns admired each other's jewelry while critiquing the appetizers. The conversation flowed around themes of giving back and social responsibility, all while the actual workers remained invisible servants. Dorothy had been restless in the kitchen, confined to her homework, while the sounds of music and laughter drifted from the ballroom. At 8 years old, she possessed an energy that 4 walls could barely contain. Chelsea checked on her periodically, bringing her juice and crackers, whispering reminders to stay quiet. "Why can't I see the piano, Mama?" Dorothy asked during one visit. "I can hear it from here, but they're not playing it right." Chelsea glanced toward the music salon, where the Steinway sat silent among the chattering guests. "It's not for us tonight, baby. Just focus on your math, okay?" But children, especially curious ones, have their own logic. When Chelsea was summoned to the kitchen to help serve dessert, Dorothy made her choice. The music salon connected to the main hallway through French doors that stood slightly ajar. The piano called to her like a magnet calls iron. Oliver had retreated to his home office around 9, claiming exhaustion from networking. In truth, he wanted to observe his guests without the burden of constant interaction. From his leather chair, positioned strategically behind a partially open door, he could watch the ballroom's reflection in the hallway mirrors. He was considering the evening's conversations when the music began. The melody started softly, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, but played with a precision that made Oliver's breath catch. The notes cascaded through the mansion's acoustic-friendly architecture, reaching every corner with crystalline clarity. Conversations in the ballroom gradually ceased as guests turned toward the sound. From his office, Oliver could see directly into the music salon. A small figure sat at the Steinway, feet barely reaching the pedals, hands moving across the keys with impossible confidence. The child, He realized it was the housekeeper's daughter, played with the technical skill of a conservatory graduate and the emotional depth of someone who understood heartbreak. The nocturne transitioned seamlessly into Debussy's Clair de Lune, then into something Oliver didn't recognize but that made his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. Every guest in the ballroom had moved closer to the salon's entrance, champagne glasses forgotten, conversations abandoned. Oliver rose from his chair, legs unsteady. He had spent 30 years in the cultural elite circles of Manhattan. He had attended countless Lincoln Center galas, funded music scholarships, owned a box at the Metropolitan Opera. He knew talent when he heard it. This wasn't just talent. This was the kind of raw, undeniable genius that appeared perhaps once in a generation. The music stopped abruptly. Dorothy's hands fell to her lap as she noticed the crowd of adults staring at her from the doorway. Her eyes found her mother, who had appeared behind the guests, face pale with terror and something that might have been pride. An elderly gentleman stepped forward from among the guests. Theodore Ashworth was a fixture in New York's classical music scene, former conductor of the Philharmonic, current board member of Juilliard, and critic whose reviews could make or break careers. He approached Dorothy with the careful movements of someone approaching a rare butterfly. "Child," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "how long have you been playing?" Dorothy looked to her mother, who nodded encouragingly despite her obvious fear. "Since I was 4, sir. Mama couldn't afford lessons, so I taught myself from YouTube videos and library books." A murmur rippled through the gathering. Theodore knelt beside the piano bench, studying Dorothy's face with growing intensity. His own face had gone ashen. "What's your full name, sweetheart?" "Dorothy Elizabeth Brooks, sir." Theodore's hand flew to his mouth, his eyes filled with tears that he didn't bother to hide. "Brooks, Elizabeth Brooks. Was that your grandmother's name?" Dorothy nodded solemnly. "Mama says I have her eyes." The silence that followed was absolute. Theodore stood slowly, turned to face the room full of New York's cultural elite, and spoke in a voice that shook with decades of suppressed grief. "Ladies and gentlemen, I would like you to meet my great-granddaughter." The story poured out in fragments over the next hour. Elizabeth Brooks had been Theodore's daughter, a promising pianist who had married young and moved to Chicago against her family's wishes. A house fire 10 years ago had reportedly claimed her life along with her husband and children. Theodore had mourned the loss of his entire bloodline, never knowing that Chelsea had escaped with baby Dorothy, had started over in New York with nothing but determination and her daughter's remarkable gift. Oliver watched from the edge of the room as his guests, people he had known for years, transformed before his eyes. These were individuals who prided themselves on discovering talent, on nurturing artistic excellence. Yet Dorothy had been invisible to them until this moment, hidden behind the assumptions they made about house cleaners and their children. The evening's remainder blurred together in a cascade of introductions, phone numbers, and promises. Theodore wept openly as he held Dorothy, whispering about piano lessons and conservatory applications. Chelsea stood to the side, overwhelmed by the sudden attention, protective instincts warring with hope she had thought buried. Patricia Whitmore, who had earlier dismissed Chelsea with such disdain, now hovered nearby with an expression of calculating opportunism. "I always suspected there was something special about Dorothy," she lied smoothly. "Such a bright child." Oliver felt something shift inside his chest, a combination of shame and recognition. He approached Chelsea as the crowd gradually dispersed, guests making arrangements to stay in touch, to help, to be part of Dorothy's story now that it mattered to them. "Mrs. Brooks," he said quietly, "could I speak with you privately?" They stepped into his office, leaving Dorothy with her great-grandfather, who was showing her photographs on his phone of the mother she'd never known. Through the open door, they could hear him explaining about scholarship funds and music schools, about the opportunities that would now open before her. "I owe you an apology," Oliver began, then stopped. Apologies felt inadequate for the magnitude of what he was confronting. "Number, I owe you more than that. I owe you recognition, respect. I've employed you for 3 years, and I never once saw you as more than service." Chelsea stood quietly, hands folded in front of her uniform. Her silence held more dignity than his words deserved. "Dorothy's gift," he continued, "it didn't develop in a vacuum. Someone nurtured it. Someone made sacrifices. Someone saw her potential when the rest of us saw nothing." He paused, choosing his words carefully. I'd like to offer you a position in my foundation, Director of Talent Recognition. Your job would be to find the Dorothys we're missing, kids with gifts hidden by our own blind spots. Mr. Stanton, Chelsea said softly, I don't have the credentials for a position like that. The credentials, Oliver replied, thinking of his earlier phone conversation about results mattering more than excuses, are sitting at that piano, playing Chopin like she was born to it while we discussed funding arts education and never noticed the artist in our midst. 3 months later, the Oliver Stanton Foundation launched the Hidden Brilliance Initiative with Chelsea Brooks as its director and Dorothy as its inspiration. The program provided resources for identifying and nurturing artistic talent in unexpected places, janitors who painted masterpieces on their breaks, cafeteria workers who composed symphonies, security guards who wrote poetry. The foundation's first scholarship recipient was a dishwasher from Queens who had been secretly teaching himself violin in the restaurant's storage room during his breaks. The second was a hospital cleaning woman who turned out to be a mathematical genius. The third was a parking attendant who had been writing award-worthy short stories on receipts during quiet moments. Theodore Ashworth became Dorothy's formal mentor, enrolling her in a prestigious music program while ensuring she remained grounded in her roots. He established the Elizabeth Brooks Memorial Scholarship in honor of the daughter he had lost and found again through her granddaughter. On the anniversary of that first evening, Oliver hosted another gala. This time, Dorothy performed as the guest of honor, not as a surprise or curiosity, but as the celebrated young artist she was becoming. The audience included many of the same guests who had been present for her accidental debut, but the composition of the room had changed significantly. Chelsea sat in the front row, no longer in a polyester uniform, but in a tailored dress that fit her new role. Beside her sat Maria Santos, the dishwasher-turned-violinist, and Dr. Amira Hassan, the former cleaning woman now pursuing her doctorate in theoretical mathematics. The Hidden Brilliance Initiative had become a model for foundations across the country, but it was Theodore's words before Dorothy's performance that captured the evening's significance. Genius doesn't announce itself with proper credentials or prestigious addresses. It whispers from kitchen tables and practice rooms made of closets. It teaches itself from library books and YouTube videos. It survives on hope and apparent sacrifice. Tonight, we celebrate not just Dorothy's remarkable gift, but our commitment to hearing those whispers before they're forced to become shouts. Dorothy's performance that evening, a piece she had composed herself, titled Invisible, received a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. But for Chelsea, the most meaningful moment came afterward, when a young girl from the audience approached Dorothy shyly. I play piano too, the girl whispered, but nobody knows. Dorothy smiled and took her hand. Well, now somebody does. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Chelsea found herself alone in the music salon with the Steinway that had started it all. She ran her fingers across its polished surface, remembering the morning she had first seen her reflection there. Tired, invisible, defined by circumstances rather than potential. From her purse, she pulled out her old employee badge, the one with her photograph and housekeeping staff, printed below her name. Tomorrow, it would join the Foundation's Wall of Hidden Brilliance, a collection of artifacts from their scholarship recipients' previous lives. A reminder of the talents that had been overlooked, the dreams that had persevered, the genius that had waited patiently in the shadows. Oliver appeared in the doorway, watching her quiet contemplation. Any regrets? He asked. Chelsea considered the question seriously. The past months had been a whirlwind of change, learning new responsibilities, navigating social situations she had never imagined entering, watching her daughter bloom under the attention of people who finally saw her worth. Just one, she said finally. I wish Dorothy could have met her grandmother. Elizabeth would have been so proud. I think she knows, came Theodore's voice from behind them. He entered the salon slowly, leaning heavily on his walking stick, but smiling with a contentment that had been absent for too many years. Elizabeth always believed that music finds a way to survive, even when everything else is lost. Dorothy is her legacy, continuing the song. Outside, snow began to fall on Manhattan, dusting the windows of the mansion that had become a catalyst for change. Inside, 3 unlikely allies, the reformed billionaire, the former housekeeper, and the grieving grandfather, stood together in a room where genius had finally been recognized. The story of Chelsea and Dorothy Brooks became legendary in New York's philanthropic circles, told and retold at galas and fundraisers. But for Chelsea, the most important part wasn't the recognition or the foundation or even the financial security that now allowed her to dream bigger dreams for her daughter. It was the understanding that talent had always been there, waiting. That genius doesn't depend on recognition to exist, but recognition depends on the willingness to look beyond assumptions and see the extraordinary in the apparently ordinary. Years later, when Dorothy performed at Carnegie Hall as the youngest soloist in the venue's history, Chelsea kept that old employee badge in her evening purse, a reminder of the invisible woman who had raised a visible star, and the night when everything changed because someone finally chose to listen. "Brilliance doesn't need permission to exist," Dorothy said in her program notes that evening. "It only needs someone brave enough to recognize it." And in the audience, hundreds of people who had learned to see differently applauded not just for the music, but for the truth behind it, that the most extraordinary gifts often come wrapped in the most ordinary packages, waiting for someone to look closely enough to unwrap them.